Welcome back to Unfiltered Unspoken. And as we said, we're going to keep bringing those life experiences in hopes that it may connect with you so that you can start the journey to healing, or you may know someone that's going through the trauma and you can connect someone and help them start the journey to healing. I want to bring up Daniel. We want to thank you for being a guest on Unfiltered Unspoken Podcast. It is an honor. And thank you for sharing your testimony. If you can come up and tell the audience a little bit about yourself. And then, as you know, Sid is going to kick off that first question.
Awesome. Thank you. So, Daniel Faust, veteran Air Force, four kids, a beautiful wife, and went through a lot of trauma to eventually become a veteran transformation coach. So, we'll be talking more about that in the show. And my main goal is for you to be transformed, not just live in transition.
I like that. I like that saying a lot. And thank you again for being here with us.
There you go.
Yes, sir. So we always start off at the beginning. Now, were there any, or what was your home structure like? Did you suffer any trauma, as a adolescent? And if you could just tell us a little bit about what your growing up experience was like.
Yeah. So, from 0 to 8 was a pretty normal life. And then around 8 years old, and I didn't realize this until I was like 30, but from 8 to 15, I was getting sexually molested by a family member on a semi-regular basis in that particular regard. Didn't know what I was walking into, was kind of psychologically manipulated to go over and to do that stuff. And in that process also, my mother and father were consistently fighting on a regular basis. So my dad worked night shift. My mom was with working day job or different jobs, but then she was with other men, like four men within a 20-year period. And I knew at least three of them in that particular regard. I think that one of the most traumatic things outside of the sexual molestation, because it took me years before I even came to the reality of that, but during that time trauma, was the third guy that my mom was cheating with. I knew. We hung out, and that type of thing. My dad never knew and everything else. And my dad never asked the conversation. He was always working at nights. But when he did find out, my dad was ripping me, my brother, and my sister to go figure out. Well, my sister was already used to lying. My conscience was kind of back and forth. And my brother had no clue. My brother was actually mentally retarded because he didn't process everything at the normal level. So I know it's probably a cliche word, but that's the clinical diagnosis he had, was mentally retarded. So when my dad ripped me about finding out where the guy was at, I got freaked out, fear of God in me, and I didn't have God in me at the time, but basically blabbed everything. So my dad rushes out the door from a third floor apartment all the way down, gets in the car, and then drives off. Found out the next day, the guy that my dad found out about the guy and my mom, the guy died of a heart attack the next day. That really scared me. My dad had that much, and I don't think of him as a physical altercation man, but boy, when he gets frustrated, I'm just wondering if he scared him to death, because he literally was in the newspaper the next day, dead. So that was probably the most traumatic thing, at least at that point. I was between 8 to 12 years old. And then from there, again, the sexual molestation was back and forth, but I kind of didn't really process it. But then also around 15 years old, I'm still not 15 years old. Let's see, 1995, about 14 years old, my parents went through a divorce, and it was the day before my birthday. And then culminating that, about 18 months later, my brother died in a drowning accident. So that's those three traumas combined. And obviously the sexual trauma wasn't like in the front, but obviously my parents' divorce and brother's death was like right there. It kind of basically said F you to Jesus and F you to people. So that was kind of my structure as a kid. I did go to career and technical high school. I kind of shoved everything into my life to avoid the pain. So I hung out with people and did a bunch of things. I'm pretty sure that's pretty common, that we try to avoid the pain, but that was the rest of my upbringing until I went into the military. So that's like my upbringing in a nutshell.
Okay, that's a lot in a nutshell. Now I need to figure out where I'm going to start at.
Yeah, of course.
I guess let's start back into um, your mom and dad fighting?
Mhm.
Was it more just arguments or verbal or physical? And how did it affect you?
It was more verbal than anything else. I didn't see any visual abuse. Like my mom didn't have any scars or any of the types of things. The only scar that my mom was aware of is that she got cancer in her back, like in her 30s. And I saw that scar, but that's the only like, an actual scar, just like my elbow. It's like a surgery scar. So my mom never showed any signs of physical abuse or emotional abuse. It was just fights and arguments behind closed doors. I got to give kudos to my parents in even that particular regard, is that you look at different relationships from all different spectrums. They at least kept it in the bedroom. Did they ever tell us about it? No. And we were scarred from a distance, from the noise, from everything else. But at least they kept it in the bedroom. I'll give them that as an adult type thing. I don't want to always be just totally negative trauma. I want to be balanced in that particular regard. So they did that, but it was like one of those things from 8 years old, knowing your parents are going to get a divorce. And when you go to church and you're saying like, it's not an if, it's a when. And you knew it was a ticking time bomb. And it didn't tick down to my 14th birthday the day before. But the thing is that it was a ticking time bomb. So when you saw other people getting divorces, in the 90s, that like they say the divorce rates between like 40 to 50%. That's never true anyway. But in that particular regard, you see it more prevalent. You start seeing your friends. You're like, when's my parents going to go do that? So I would say in that particular regard, it was that online fear that you're going to be, that you're already a latchkey kid, and now you're going to be part of the statistic of being divorced. So only verbal stuff, and it was arguments. Didn't see any verbal abuse. I would say even in my dad, when he gets really angry and he speaks French and English, it's never been verbally abusive, even to me. So
Absolutely. Now, with the situation of, you kind of having knowledge of your mother's infidelity and, didn't kind of teeter-tottering on kind of what to do there, did that affect, or did your father let that affect you in his relationship? And inadvertently, excuse me, how did that affect the relationship with your mother? Did you feel a type of way and thinking that maybe she is the catalyst that broke up the family? How did that work out with the relationships with your parents at that time?
yeah, I wish I could say I was logical in that. I definitely wasn't. I was leaning towards my mom's side. I was a mama's boy at that point. So even though my mom did that over and over again, and again, I didn't see the sexual actions of anything, as I saw the relationship, like going out to eat and going to these places and whatnot and hanging out with the guy. And I didn't think anything of that. I mean, I didn't even have any Christian values until my 20s. So from a secular perspective, I just saw she had guy friends and they would hang out and they would know us and we would do things with them. And sometimes it fun and sometimes it was task. But it came to, I always had a deep relationship with my mom and I didn't have a relationship with my dad. And I blamed my dad for the divorce. And even in my 30s, when I try to confront, he's like, you don't know the half what she did to me and everything else. I'm like, I want to know. I want to know. But he's in a place that he won't go over and reveal that. I don't know if it's the Canadian side of him or is it just the older generations? It's like, all right, you're not going to share. So both the relationships were kind of messed up, torn up. I should have been more deeply connected to my father than my mother, based on like, okay, my mom was the perpetrator of that. But in my personal belief, and it might be a little weird, it does sort of take two to tango. And I'm going to try to thread this needle very tightly. And what I mean is the majority of the time, it's one. But when you have a relationship that you go over and let's say you're constantly working nights and weekends and then work is becoming the functional savior of the relationship and you're not feeding into that relationship. So if love's not given to the wife and respect's not given to the man, it's going to perpetuate and turn and then eventually go like this and split. My mom made the decision to emotionally, spiritually, and sexually sleep with each of these men. But we in a marriage can sometimes put it as a catalyst if we don't put our marriage as the forefront and first. And then also my personal belief, putting God, both of us together, putting God in there. Because when we put something else other than God in marriage and first, and then you start putting other things, there's going to be a split and there's a divide. So when I've analyzed this for the past 25 years, which is a lot of part of my veteran transformation coaching from the bedroom, is if you're both not synergistically focusing towards each other and towards God, you're going to be putting the enemy and the flesh and the devil a wedge into that space. And part of the ownership sometimes is even passivity. So that's where I come from out in that particular regard, is that
Sorry. So I want to go back at 8 years old, when you were physically violated by a family member.
mhm.
Um, how did that start? How did the family member get that close to you to for this to happen?
Family member lived in the home, so obviously it's that close of a dynamic in that particular regard. And that family member had a older authority over me. So in that particular regard, and with that, they would just psychologically, emotionally mess with me to get me to do what they wanted me to do to them. So, and then they made it sound softer than what it is. So they kind of made it like a game, and that's why it took me so long. It wasn't like Drake, but it wasn't like direct and saying, "Hey, oral sex," or "Hey, penetration," or "Hey, this types of things." It was more like forced fondling, forced groping, forced whatever, saying it's kid type stuff. And if you don't do these things, I'm going to get you in trouble. Well, fear of trouble has always been huge for me, especially in those early years, that I did those things and didn't even know what I was doing. Even though I knew about sex as 8 years old, read the pamphlets, because that was something in the 90s that parents didn't teach sex. It was school that taught sex. You get the pamphlets and then you know more than everything else. Well, I knew the aspects and the technical words, and I can even teach now on sexual personality styles. But the thing of the matter of it is that I didn't have an intellectual, emotional, spiritual, practical knowledge of what I was doing. I only had the technical jargon. So, and then with that psychological, emotional, getting in trouble, punishment, discipline modality, you just did what you did to not get in trouble, but you didn't realize that you were getting violated or forced to violate that person. Well, to them, it wasn't violation. For them, it was gratification. But, you know, that was the hard part. So, and it happened in spurts. That person was already, I knew, was sexually active. Like, I never saw them sexually active, but obviously there was so much stuff going on in their lives. And since I was so close proximity, if they weren't sexually active, I don't know, I must be blind. I mean, so I force fed into it and was manipulated to it when, in my personal opinion, when they weren't getting the love physically, mentally, emotionally that they were looking for. I look at it now, it's like it was a cry for hurt and pain. Totally wrong with what they did, but that's what they did. And then when I was the first time that I defended myself on that person, because I was really small as a kid. I was 4'6" until about 12, and I was 4'10" until about 16, 17. And then I shot up to 5'8". I'm not that towering of a man. So if you're watching the video, you're not like, he's huge. I'm like, no, I'm a midget version for a guy. So it was when I was about that height and about that weight, and then the person started manipulating me on something stupid, and I defended myself. That was when it actually stopped, and it never happened again. Once a person knew I could defend myself, that's when it stopped, and it kind of just subsided from there.
Definitely. And we see, a common pattern with those people that we've had on the episodes here that have been, sexually abused or molested. It has happened more than once or with different people. And for more reasons than one, but it is the common denominator. Now, do you believe, I wouldn't even ask what you believe, but do you believe that there's any intersection of, every time that it has happened, or they, have a common understanding that your parents are going through something, they're not really kind of focus on you? Like, what do you think it is that kind of gives people the kind of idea that it's okay or to even try, with a particular child or a particular person?
I would say, at least from my experience, trauma imbues trauma without having Christ in healing. So I wasn't a Christian then. Based on of the person I know, that person that did it, not a Christian even to this day and whatnot. And even my family as a general were not Christians. They went to church, but they really didn't live out a transformed life. So when you get hurt, let's say let's just say, I'll just look at this water bottle as you can barely see. You're an idiot, water bottle. Well, the water bottle doesn't retract back because of, it's an object, but when it's a person, you tend to retaliate. So my perception of the person now looking at from a 42 lens compared to an 8 to 15-year-old lens is saying that this person was hurt in other ways. I heard that the person was hurt and manipulated themselves. Don't have proof of it, but I think they just perpetuated their hurt onto me, because it was even as a child, there was always things happening in the household dynamic that perpetuated other things. So if it wasn't sexual molestation, it was getting into trouble or things being stolen, getting blamed on, and those types of things. So it was always when that person got in trouble because it was close proximity, in the family house dynamic, that would happen. So I have to say, hurt breeds hurt, unfortunately, unless you go over and look for healing. And my personal belief, looking into Christ for that healing. Without that, it's just going to perpetuate. I even did it myself. It's like if someone hurt me, I would hurt them back. So my hurt wouldn't be at home because I had no authority. So I would hurt people in the classroom. I'd make them cry. I'd make them go over and hurt because I was a fast tongue, fast thinker, very short person. And then I can blame you trying to beat up a small dude. I mean, and try to gang up on people to get that. So unfortunately, I think hurt breeds hurt. I think there's very few people in life that go psychologically say, I'm going to sexually molest this person. I am cognitive. I'm aware. I'm going to do this habitual, horrible sin. And I want them to be hurt for the rest of their lives. I don't think someone comes that far into it. There might be a few, but I think the majority of it is that they're hurt. I've not dealt with it. It gets shattered. It gets fragmented. And they find a way to go over and to perpetuate that hurt. And then some people are truly evil. They are. But I think the majority are like, they're hurt from something else. They don't know how to deal with it. They don't take it through a faith. They take it through themselves. And what are we going to do when we do it ourselves? We're going to go fill that void. And unfortunately, sometimes people fill that void is with molestation, rape, and everything else. So.
I would agree. So we try to bring a transparency to the audience. What are some of the changes that you went through when you were inappropriately violated? What are some of the changes that you went through at home or in school, and your parents didn't see these signs of change within you?
Yeah, well, they didn't see them because of so much stuff. Parents' divorce, brother's death, and then that is the underlying. It wasn't just one thing. Like some of the people in our veteran books that we interview have gone through that trauma, but that was maybe one of their traumas. For me, it was such an underlying trauma that it didn't come to realization until my 30s. So I could say what things came out of all three traumas combined, that when I started to break is brother was dead, drowning accident, parents divorced within an 18-month span. I basically said, and I didn't even have a faith, but I said, F you to God and F you to faith and F you to everybody else. So I pushed myself more into work. I pushed myself more into people. I pushed myself more into just pornography, which that's a hidden one that people didn't know that about me. So pornography started in that particular regard. So I'd say those are the things. But I think because I was a latchkey kid and it was already in my teens, you got to have proximity to see people's pain. That's, I think, sometimes the unfortunate thing in this world, especially with this digital world and such distance, is that we'll share more of our pain with the digital people that are thousands of miles away because we feel close in proximity compared to the people that are in proximity. We truly don't have proximity relationship. Yeah, I'm passing through the house, or I'm passing through work, or I'm passing through the neighborhood, but I'm not truly seeing your face. So I don't get to see the good, bad, and ugly of you, and then beautifully be there with you in the good, bad, and ugly so you can be transformed. Because if you don't have those people there through the good, bad, and ugly, you never know when their bad is. You can't go over and challenge them on their bad and their ugly, and you can't go still love them and know that they're good because of him, Christ Jesus. So my family didn't see it. It was just a perpetual of parents' divorce, brother's death, see certain factors, but never truly invested because they probably saw those two things as the perpetuating arm of what the things I was doing compared to, because they never even challenged me on it. When I brought it to them, like in my early 30s, they're like, why didn't you bring this to me? Why didn't you go over and say something? I didn't realize until just about 6 months ago. How was I supposed to bring it to you when I was 8? So I would say in my particular regard, it wasn't really revealed. I started to see remnants of it in marriage, but you usually don't go to your parents and say like, hey, I'm having sexual trauma issues while I'm having intimacy with my wife. And here's the things I'm struggling. And here's my thoughts. And here's my fears and everything else. You got to have an intimate relationship in the first place to go over and to share that with others. So for me, I think it's more of a many traumas come together and just trying to figure out which ones triggered what, and then start peeling the onion away to deal with it.
Absolutely. And I do want to ask, because you kind of gave us the rundown of you and your siblings. You have a sister who, just kind of at danger just being a female, and then, a brother with mental deficit. So were you the only one that, was affected by the molestation, or did anything happen to them as well, to your knowledge?
To my knowledge, either one of them, no. In that particular regard. I was with my brother more than anything until I went to high school. So we were in the same school each and every day. Obviously, he had a different classroom. They didn't have, there's a term called IEP. So if your audience member don't know, it's individual education plan. Back in the 80s and 90s, they would take people with mental health in psychological health deficits, and they would put them in those mental retardation classes. I'm not trying to be offensive, but that's what the word was at the time. And they were all together. Now they've integrated those students as much as they can into the classroom. So Stephen was with me, throughout the nights and weekends, shared the same room until brother's death and everything else. And we were in the same school on a regular basis. We were only about 18 months apart. So we were in the same grade. My sister and I have a 5-year gap. So it was only one time in my life that I was with her in the same school, because they had and they don't do these anymore much, a 7th through 12th grade school. So they had junior high and high school in the same school. So for 1 year, I was in the same school as my sister, and that was it. So any things that happened to her, I'd only see her at home, and there was few interactions. And obviously with a 5-year gap, those interactions are sparse. So I can't say on that particular regard. I speculate for having a relationship, but I have no tangible evidence or proof. I only can speculate at best.
So your speculation is yes or no?
My speculation is yes, that she's gone through stuff. Yeah. I mean, okay. So I lean towards it because of the outlawing behaviors that I saw, but we never had truly an intimate relationship. It's always been like this, and it just kept furthering the gap. Once I became a Christian, me and my family became further and further gap. John 15 talks about it. It's like, because you're spiritually transformed and you're living in a new life of eternity, and they're not. And until they go over and transform, and I'm paraphrasing pretty badly, is that the distance just goes like this. It's kind of like the same thing. It's like you're single people and married people. Sometimes you can stay friends, but your life transforms so much when you become married compared to single. It's like this paradigm. And then if you start having kids and they're still single, or then if you then hey, 40 years from now, you became a grandparent and they never went got married. There's so many different life things that are not parallel anymore. They're parallel in the sense that they keep going like this, but they never truly intersect. And me and my family never truly intersected, like after I became a Christian, and it just became more of a battle. So I will never truly know until hopefully that intimacy gets restored. But as of right now, I only can speculate because the relationship's kind of like this.
Okay. Um, your brother. I wanted to go into your brother growing up. You said he was deaf. I want to make sure. Is that correct or incorrect?
It's
Correct me if
mentally retarded. So what the terminology means is that an IQ on average spectrum is 100. That's the average. If it's above 100, that means you're usually very high intellectual, genius, Mensa, those types of things. So for example, my wife just on her verbal is 119. So she would be almost like a Mensa person in her verbal IQ. For me, I was a little above 100. I met the qualifications for standard IQ, but my brother ranges between 60 to 80. So it was mild to moderate retardation. So if you did a scale and said, hey, at 6th grade, I'm going to test you on 6th grade knowledge currently to that generation. And if you're scoring below more than typically a grade, it's probably an intellectual issue. So mental retardation would be more like intellectual deficits. I guess that'd be the better word for it nowadays. So he was between 60 and 80. So it would take him, for every 1 grade of learning, it would take him 3 years to master all those things. So if he was on an IEP in 6th grade, he would go 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, because they would push the students nowadays. But on his scales, he would only still be at 6th grade going into 9th grade. So based on those current ops, he would, if he did live, it would have took him until he wanted to become a scientist, which is an average bachelor's degree. He would have been in his 70s by the time he mastered at 18. So, emotionally, really high functional, physically, really high functional. We called him the spider because he played basketball and there was always some appendage on you, no matter where you shot. He could go up and block you. I think he could have played in the NBA if he was really interested, because he would dominate on the court. He was about 2 inches taller than me. He was 5'10", but that guy, because he was almost guy size by the time he died, he could dominate the court. So he was the person that could go over and just like you can know when you had a conversation with him, but when you got on the court, there was no one equal to him on the court. He was above par. So that was an amazing gift in that particular regard to go over and to watch. Just to say, how did he get that appendage in that way? It's like, because you don't know what he's going to go bring up, but the ball is going to be covered and he's going to dunk on you. And I'm like, you're only 5'10". How are you doing this?
Absolutely. Now, when was, I guess, your last experience, with being violated? Was that when, you decided to fight back, or was that just with that particular individual that was violating you?
I can't remember the last experience. I can remember when it stopped. The times I remember, they were in a different home. When we moved to the new home, I didn't experience any others. So when we moved from a city in Rhode Island, a really small city in Rhode Island, to a bigger city in Rhode Island, that's when it stopped. When the person actually started to respect me, leave me alone in general, and those types of things, and start having, at least somewhat cordial conversations, that was when I had to defend myself on a stupid argument about laundry. So laundry argument happened, tried to choke me because of not getting the laundry done, and I had to defend myself to get the person off me. And I said, are you crazy? It's just laundry. It's freaking laundry. And that's when the person, I think, when just got a check to themselves, and they're like, I'm not going to do anything anymore. And then that relationship kind of went distant in that particular regard. So I had no more safety concerns at all after that. I didn't have any specific, no, I had no episodes at that new house. So I don't know if it's new house, new rules in that person's mindset. I don't know what it was, but after we moved into that house, that new house, we never had any altercations in that particular garden. Really had no altercations. It was more of about a passing ships for the rest of the time until I went to the military.
Okay. Did you ever confront them?
I went over and confronted my direct family members of my mother and my father. My mother believed me. My father didn't. I didn't feel safe because I've already had other toxic relationships with them, as an adult. So there was even some deformation as I've been growing my brand. Hasn't happened about 5 to 7 years, but at the time when I was doing early stuff with marriages and families before I did veteran transformation. So I never felt safe to bring up those conversations to that person. The person third party told me, they said like, yeah, if you say anything ever again, I'm going to sue you for defamation. I'm like, I'm not trying to pursue you for what you call it. I just want to go through healing, but I couldn't even get, and I had to distance the relationships because my mother and my father shared with that person that was living in that home what happened. And then, yeah. So it was one of those things that I've only told them. And I've told people, like, obviously on podcasts and different things. And and if I have a really close, intimate friends that have gone through military sexual trauma or whatever, I'll share the specifics with them. And I share a little bit in my stories and whatnot. But with that person, unfortunately not. It's just not safe. I've had to basically the past few years saying, I'm okay, kind of like what Paul and Barnabas, it's kind of a bad example in a sense, but Paul and Barnabas weren't theologically on the same page before Jesus, but they went over and went their separate ways. We, in my life, me and that person are not even close in any values. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to love on for you. I'm going to go pray on for you. I'm going to hope for healing and everything else, but I'm going to keep my distance. And even though certain family members want me to reconcile with that person, there's a difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. Forgiveness is going over and saying, I give it to God. I let it go. I ask for healing and release. Reconciliation is trying to bring that process of that relationship back together to then go over and to be like it was before. And in some parts and certain things you can be, but reconciliation is 2, forgiveness is 1. I can forgive, that person can forgive. Reconciliation is both coming together. So I've just tried to put healthy boundaries. If you need to read a really good book on that, Dr. Henry T. Cloud talks about boundaries from different perspectives. You can get one for marriage, family, kids, abuse, those types of things. And he talks about you just sometimes need to put a healthy boundary. And that's what I've had to do with certain family members. I'm like, I'm just going to put a healthy boundary around. And if you're going to invade my fence, I'm just going to keep putting that boundary up. And then from a distance, if I can see it safe, it's kind of like if a dog came to your fence and tried to bite you the first time, you would observe from a distance until you knew the dog was safe. So then you could pet the dog again. But if the dog's always biting the hell out of everything and everyone, I'm not going to allow you into my property just to go over and attack me and to attack whoever lives on my property. So I've just had to, a few years ago, specifically put even boundaries even tighter with family members because the family members are trying to bring me back into the fold. And that's not gospel. There has to be reconciliation in both regards. Repentance, turning 180 degrees, asking for forgiveness, respecting that regard. Doesn't matter if it's a divorce, doesn't matter if it's molestation, doesn't matter if it's hurt, robbery, name whatever, sin, law, crime, whatever it is. If both ain't in the game, you don't just go in and say like, yeah, it's been a bit, I'm going to forgive and forget. No, you're never going to forget. Only God can forget from the east to the west. That's it. We remember, but when I go and forgive, I'm remembering that I forgive you, but I'm also remembering that I have to put a boundary around, or I'm going to put myself in unnecessary hurt, or anybody else, because those people sometimes will attack others. Because when you're strong, sometimes if that person's really sick and toxic, they'll attack others, and if they don't get stopped, they'll just keep going. So I just had to do that. It just initially came up like maybe about a month ago. Someone again tried to go over and like, let's come back, let's go reconcile. We're praying for you. I'm like, all right, you can continue to do that. But I don't see it in your language. I don't see it in your life. I don't, from a distance on my fence, I don't see healing from here. I don't see reconciliation. I don't see repentance. I see a makeshift fake there. And you got to have discernment on that. So any relationship you're going to bring back and reconcile, take the time to go over and for you to walk through forgiveness. And then take the time, if you're going to reconcile, observe that they are wanting to reconcile and they're forgiven and repentant. Because if they're not, it's going to be a ticking time bomb. The DNA of Relationships is a really good book too to read. Dr. Gary Smalley and his son talk about it. The cycle of abuse. When the cycle of abuse happens, is like you'll go and say, hey, the event will go over and permeate like a teapot. Then you'll go over and explode. And then you'll start giving sex and gifts and other things to quote unquote heal it. But then it builds up again. You got to give it time to go over and see if that cycle is broken. Because sometimes people can mask for a while and that circle can take a long time to refill and hit the circle, come back up. So definitely if you're working through forgiveness and reconciliation, give it longer than you would think it'd be. Don't allow your emotions to go over and to dictate. You got to use both. You got to use your heart and your mind to go over and reconcile. So it's a bigger process. I've only started the process of forgiveness, and reconciliation is with certain people. But yeah, again, take it wisely, get some good counsel, get some good psychotherapy, read some good books. If you're a Christian, definitely get into the word and take some time in prayer and fellowship. Don't walk it in too quickly. God can do the rest for reconciliation. Sometimes reconciliation might just happen in heaven, and that's it.
Yeah. And I want to say, Sid's about to jump in real quick, but I want to say it's defamation if it's not true. I would have said was, let's take a lie detective test.
I agree.
Yeah.
I'd agree. But the thing of the matter is that was a fear thing for me because I was really trying to help people. And I just went over and said, okay, for me to help more people, sometimes I'm just going to go over and I'm going to share where it's important, but I'm not going to share the specifics because if it's not there, because in a public eye, it can be taken the wrong way. But in a private conversation, it might be best to share those deeper moments because then that person gets healing. So I'm willing to be sacrificed, to be vulnerable to do that if it's a person that truly needs it. If they need to know that person intimate detail and they say, hey, it's this person. Oh, I can technically sympathize because it was that person for me. Then I would share that in that moment. But in a public sense, I just want to share the feelings and the moments and the intimacy that I was called a dumb royal F for a long time. And that was one of the words I heard from that person. It took me decades to go over and to redefine that because my name is Daniel Ryan Faust. So she replaced the name in that particular garb. So it took me a long time to go over and to say, I'm from a divine royal family. That's what God has made me. So I had to continually do that. Even as I'm writing my initials down for certain things on military and civilian forms, I had to say it's a divine royal family. And I had to rebrand that for myself for healing because that got called over and over and over again. Words do permeate. That's why words have to do the same thing as healing. Those words have to be transformed.
Okay.
Wonderful.
Was it a male? Was it a male or a female?
I kind of revealed it as a female, so yeah.
It's a female, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll leave it at that. But yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry. Now, did your experience, through life up until that time, did that kind of go into the choice you made to go into the military? And if so, what about what you have been through made the military seem, you interested in it?
Yeah, the military for me, it was an escape from everything. All those hurts and all those pains initially. I wasn't looking at it from a Christian lens at the time. I was looking at it okay, life just sucks in many different realms. Feed myself with porn, go beat myself up, go over and C&D student, graduate high school. Jobs really didn't pan out and everything else. Working at a grocery store at the time and wanted to go over and to have freedom and was kind of that adult, non-adult-ish thing. So after a year of college and everything else, the military was actually the initial temptation was, and it was a positive temptation, but a negative one at the same time, was because of a girl. I had a crush on this girl since 9th grade. I went over and found out that she was going to the recruiter's office. She needed a ride. I went over and gave her a ride to the place. I told her how much I loved her since 9th grade. She told me she had a boyfriend that crushed me in the place. And that day, I did not realize that God was working on my heart to transform, because so it drove her there. I'm obviously mentally crushed in my head. I think of it almost like the old analogy of the Mexican hat getting thrown down and my heart's getting ripped out at the same time, and people are stomping my heart as they're dancing on this hat. Old 90s analogy. But in that particular guard, when I went into the office, she mentioned, she's like, I can't go in the military because my boyfriend will go leave me if we're not together in the same proximity. And I said something that I'll paraphrase. I don't remember the exact words anymore, but basically said, if he's truly in love with you, he will stay with you no matter the distance. And that was one of those things that started to shape me in that particular guard, because the Lord must have had me, because love has no bounds. It has no distance. It's not like, hey, long distance relationship, it's going to go over and get destroyed and everything else. Because once I went in the military and then got married 6 years later, 4 deployments, 36 moves, several states lived in, and everything else. And even our marriage had a rocky almost divorce in 2013, but love has no bounds. So in Christ, I can go over and do all things because he strengthens me. So this marriage can work, even though the first 7 years was hell, and the majority of it was because of me. And the Lord has transformed my marriage so much that I want to go over and share that with my veteran community. So for me, in summary, that the military was an escape from my pain, but it really was an escape to Jesus. And that escape to Jesus now allows me to go over and to serve my veterans from the prayer room to the boardroom. So I would say, even though I didn't plan it that way, he planned it that way, and he plans better than I can. So I would say that's in the summary through introspective.
Okay. I want to go back because you lost your brother, and if you could tell us his age and how you lost him.
Yeah, that I can go to the specifics, definitely. So his name is Stephen Eugene Faust. He has a Facebook page. My dad created it. He was born October 3rd of 1979. My son is born October 13th, 2007. So I almost thought that like my son was going to be born the same day as my brother. So I'm like, oh, I'm working through all this brokenness. Now my son's born many years later. So me and my brother were same room, different people though. Bunk beds kind of like this. My dad built a really awesome bunk bed that one bed was like this, the other bed was like this. So he would jump off the bed all the time and then come to me. But if I went on his bed, oh no, ruined day and everything else. My brother was very meticulous. Stuffed animals, bed straightened perfectly. I'm like, he would have been great for the military and everything else. And we had an otter/dog relationship. 1 minute we're playing together and everything's great. And the next thing we're fighting, in that particular regard. So when I went to this new high school, and it was a career and technical high school, I couldn't wake up for the life of me. It reminds me of my son now that I think about it. My son's like a zombie when it comes to an alarm. But I did eventually wake up. I guess that's the difference, is I would have to set like 5 to 7 alarms. And every day, my brother's like, he wakes up at the sun, bam. And then he just goes over and shuts off the alarm. And he's like, I'm up. I don't need the alarm. I'm like, it's for me. It's for me. And I would every morning would have this rip fest with him and everything else. So we go our separate ways. He went to a separate school. We moved to North Smithfield because they had better school opportunities then. Because you didn't have school choice back in the day. You had to live in the city within the boundaries of where it's at now nationwide. You have school choice. If you want to drive to East Guam to go to school, as long as you can get there, they don't care. So you had to go over and move. So my dad made the strategic move to go move there. We moved there March 8th of 1997. And during those 2 months back and forth with the arguments, because I've been getting a ride with my dad to get the bus stop, or I had to go over and strategically get to the bus stop, like the public bus, and then to get down to the area, then to go walk up the hill and everything else. So I was going to a school I technically wasn't supposed to be going to after I moved. So not everything's righteous about me. I lived in a lie for 2 years to graduate that school. Anyway, so we'd have this argument every single day. So in the evenings, it was fine. He'd go play basketball and everything else and whatnot. I'd get home a little later because obviously I got to get back. I'd either be, did I have a job then? No, I didn't have a job until like 6 months later. But at the time, I was just like having to leave public buses or get a ride with my sister or her boyfriend or my dad or my mom or whoever, Joe Schmo, I could get to where I needed to go. Sometimes I even stay at my grandmother's. So the schedule was like hectic. But the day that he died, he shut up the alarm again. I ripped him a new one. And that was the last interaction I had with him. You know, I beat myself up for years on that. I'm like, I ripped my brother for a stupid alarm. What's the worst that could have been? Late to school. You know, I got C's and D's. It wouldn't have affected anything. It's not like I was like a stellar 4.0 student. So he went off to school. I went off to school. I got usually picked on every day. I got home later because I couldn't get the regular bus because the people were picking on me. So I took the public bus. I already had a pass. So like they had a school bus that would get me close to home. And then there was a public bus that would get me all the way back to like 3 miles prior to my house. So I took the public bus, then got picked up from my sister and everything else. And she just dropped me off because she's like, I got other things to do. Okay. Then I get a phone call and they said, hey, this is so-and-so. I forgot if it was the cops or the ambulance or whatever it was. And yes, we used to answer phones this way. And they said, yeah, are you the father of Stephen Faust? I'm like, no, I'm the brother. And then gave me information. And then I had to take the phone number down and then tell my dad, like, hey, somebody called from this hospital or this police department. I can't remember which one, if it was the hospital or them, because we had a bunch of calls that night. So I gave that to my dad. Then my sister came in and I gave her like the quick information on what happened. And then my dad called back my sister. I think she had a cell phone back then. You know, I think I had one too, but we didn't use them as much as we do now. And found out that he was in the hospital and he was in a drowning accident. So my dad floors it to the first hospital, and then we're kind of in limbo for a couple hours because we don't know what's going on and everything else. And because he's under 18, they consider him a child under medical. So once they got stabilized, they floored him from one hospital to a children's hospital. So when all the family got there, and we're a divided family. It's a divorced family. And then the extended family was kind of, but we all came together to the hospital. It was like the first time we were all together for a long time, like grandmother, aunts, everybody there and whatnot. And he died twice that night. He died at 6:35 initially, and then his heart rate went back up. And then he died again officially at 10:45. They said if he ever would have came back to life, he would have been a vegetable because he already had mental retardation, you know, intellectual deficits. So he eventually all the equipment just failed him, even the life support. And then they just let him go because the only thing that was keeping him going was the life support. And then they're fighting to keep the life support going. So at basically 10:45 at night, that's when he died. And that's when I said, I cried myself to sleep. First time sleeping. Our rooms weren't even set up yet because we just moved in March 8th of 97. He died May 29th of 1997. So literally 61 days. I'm a numbers freak, so it was even before, you know, all this. So roughly 60, 70 days afterwards, he's now dead. And I'm sleeping on a mattress, crying to myself to sleep, saying, F you to God, I don't know how I'm going to go make it through and everything else. Average funeral, 3 days later. I was so emotionally distraught. I defecated myself, and no one knows that until this day right now. I have private conversations, but now it's public, whatever. It was 27 years ago, whatever. I was that distraught from there. So all the other brokenness, I was so distraught with my brother's death that catalysm, everything else just kind of went to the wayside. So I basically just filled the void for about 5 years and went into the military in 2000. So from that point, I was emotionally numb. I mean, I don't know how to relate to numbness now, but I'm trying to reflect from years ago. I was like, it was just a catalyst in a shell just going through life. And that was the first time in a while that life whipped by quickly for me. So those 5 years were kind of a blur until after military, basic training, tech school, and everything else. When I became a Christian, that's when I started to deal with Stephen's death, and then the divorce, and then years later, the molestation. So those were a very dark 5 years for a very long time, and even poured into my marriage because I was an angry, bitter, gaslighting manipulator just because of all that hurt and pain. And it took until 2013 for my wife to spiritually kick me in the nuts and tell me that I need to repent from all this stuff in 5 years of that. So transformation took a while. So from 1997 to about 2018, 2019. So the person you're seeing now in 2024 is truly a transformed man because of what Christ has done. But it wasn't like quick. It wasn't like, hey, come to Jesus in 2002. Be like, oh, miracles. Because we think we get rid of the 5 major sins we have. And then we come out, oh, there's 35 more wheelbarrows. And they're coming in every day. And you're like, I don't know how to deal with them. And you're like, so it took a while to realize that I don't go fix my sin. He loves on me, and I walk through it together. And because of his love, then it gets easier because of his love, not because I'm just going to go repair a bunch of little things. That's the difference between transformation and doing the transition if you're trying to work through healing. People think like, I'm going to shorten the game. I'm going to do all these check blocks. And you can see even good things like Celebrate Recovery, which me and my wife went through. God, we were just angry, pissed off, depressed people that just kept saying, well, keep on coming back every week. I'm not saying Celebrate Recovery doesn't work, but for me, I was the passive aggressive dude, and we had a bunch of passive aggressive dudes. And then we got so angry, we couldn't keep a group formed. So then they put us in the codependency group. It's a time thing, but it's also his transformation thing, because some people heal super quick. So for me, it was a process. So what you're seeing today, and can speak up on this on a intellectual high level, is 20 something years of God shaping and changing and transforming, as it talks about Romans 12:2. Do not be conformed to the patterns of the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so you know his good and acceptable perfect will. That was not something quick. So no matter if you look at it from a Christian or non-Christian perspective, you can't just go in and say, hey, read a book, got 12 checklist thing, woo, healed. That would be awesome. There's a few, but the majority of us are walking through transformation as a process.
Absolutely. Demetria, do you want to swap right now and go into your question?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're almost at time. How hour goes so fast. We wanted to ask if you could give the audience advice on ways that maybe 2 things that helped you on your journey to healing.
Yeah. Number 1 is you got to know yourself. You ask yourself 2 questions. These are universal questions we teach with every veteran transformation client that we have, no matter if it's from the prayer room to the boardroom. Are you outgoing or reserved? That first part is 10% of who you are and 10% how you're going to respond in good and in bad. So even in my trauma, I responded as an outgoing person. I outwardly dealt with it. I didn't inwardly deal with it. And for a long time, I had to learn how to do the inward part because I'm not wired that way. He has to teach me that way. And the second question we ask all our veterans in that regard is, are they more task-oriented or more people-oriented? I still dealt with it as a people-oriented way. So I dealt with people before the hurt. I went to people because of the hurt. I fed everything with people because of the hurt. Even how I communicate is for the people. So that's the first piece I would go over. Is like, understand those 2 questions. We got content on our page. You go to War Hero to Superhero, no matter which page, and go over and look for that content. We have podcasts. We also have classes we teach on that. So that's the first thing. The second thing is to go over and to have that transformation, and for people to go over and to grow, is to truly go over. And for my personal thing is, you got to have a faith. You got to have something outside yourself, because if you're just doing it all on your own, I did that from 1981 to 2002. It just didn't go over and work. And I'm not the person going to say I checkboxed every single box. It's not going to be like one of those weight loss things. I did all these programs and none of it worked. I did enough that it didn't work. I'll just say that. You know, Wiccan, Buddhist, Methodist, all these other types of things, thousands of denominations in Christianity and whatnot. I need to find a relationship with Jesus. Some people need to find different faiths at that time to go and get their healing. But I believe that God, through Christ, is where you get the most healing. Other people might find it in other places. So if you don't have that and you're just relying on life, life goes the way it wants to go. And some things are going to suck. I broke my back 7 years ago and had to learn how to walk. Other people have broken their backs and learned how to walk. You know, I have headaches and migraines every day. Lord blessing, right now I don't have one. So praise Jesus in this. I'm not feeling a thing. But the thing is that we all go through those pains. And when we don't have something outside of ourselves, we're just going to go feed into negativity, become angry, become bitter. Even me as a Christian was angry and bitter. But in spite of that, he still used me and he still sustained me. So I would say those two things. You got to know yourself and know your faith. When you know those two things, that starts the journey to go get to the deeper why. So then you can start healing and realize that when I was deployed, and I'll summarize with this. When I was deployed, I was wrestling with my brother's death. This was 2007. So my first deployment, 2003, I wasn't dealing with it. I just became a Christian. I deployed. I went. I was sort of happy. Yay. 2007, I'm like, I'm dealing with this. And I went through a study called The Cure. Highly recommended. John Lynch, good pastor friend of mine. I watched that thing religiously for about 120 days. I'm a person that has to watch things over and over again to ruminate in there. So when the Lord gave me this calling in 2007, he's like, I want you to teach the world better relationships. And I said, why? You could have used my brother. You could have used somebody else. You could have used anybody else. He's like, I love you that much. And the pain that you're going through is going to be a purpose. And that's the reason why I do the things that I do since 2007. I teach the world better relationships by focusing on military veterans and first responders to transform their lives from the prayer room to the boardroom. Because of those moments. If my brother didn't die sovereignly from what the Lord does with everything, I would have been an apathetic, passive man that would have just relied on whatever relationship that would have been in me. I would not have became a man of God because of that. Did I want him to die? No. But sovereignly, God is good that he can use that bad for good, for a good purpose. So I thank God that he allowed to use that. So every day I get fueled. I'm like, because of him, Jesus, and also using that death that he uses me to die to myself so I can go love more people from the prayer room to the boardroom. So that's those two pieces of advice and what it does for transformation. Because when you know that and you know your kazone, that's when true transformation begins. Kazone is for dream and destiny. It's a Hebrew word, but another thing that we can teach on another time.
Absolutely. And we do like to call this part of the statement shameless plug. I'm sorry, mind blank.
I like that. That's just easy. You don't have to do anything. I love it. Don't even have to have a name. Love it. Love it.
Goodness. Now you see your banner scrolling across here at the bottom. That has all of your information, how our viewers can contact you and reach out. You can also let our viewers know about any projects you have coming up, anything you might have for sale, anywhere you want to draw traffic to. The floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you. So you can go to any social media or go to my Linktree/War Hero to Superhero. You can also go to our page, Learn and Live. If you're going to forget everything, because 92% gets forgotten if you don't write it down, just go to Linktree/War Hero to Superhero. That gives you access to all our projects, gives us access to all our social media, gives access to email if you're looking for a consultation. If you wanted to join us in volume 2 of Leave No Veteran Behind, which is for sale, you can join that collab. We also are going to republish Leave No Marriage Behind. My wife's books on friendship and also Elements of Surrender, which I don't have a copy for that. So if you just go to Linktree/warhero to superhero and you want to find everything else, that is the one-stop shop. You can get access to our website, social media, and everything else. We would love for you to join one of our collab projects. So if you're wanting to publish a book, get your testimony out there, go over and write your story, because your story is important. God has made your story unique and beautiful for the people that are supposed to hear it. And we would love to help you either in a collab book, a personal book, you're doing digital TV, anything from the prayer room to the boardroom. Our goal is to transform you so you can do your God-given dream. So we would love to go over and serve you. Go to Linktree/warhero to superhero. It's a number 2. So you can see it all on the ticker and the banner. Just go to Linktree/warhero to superhero. If nothing else, you got my name. Find me on Facebook. Send me a DM. I don't remember what you asked, but this is the main thing I remember. God has blessed me with that type of brain that I can figure out the gap. And we'll go figure it out together. So Linktree/warhero to superhero. If nothing else, Daniel Faust, Facebook. I'm kind of ADHD on Facebook, so you'll find me there. Other platforms, you'll still find me, but Facebook's the fastest.
Okay, you have it there. Thank you so much for your testimony, Daniel, and thank you for being a part of expanding our platform, Unfiltered Unspoken. We truly appreciate it. The purpose is to share as many life experiences as we can in hopes that someone will connect to start the journey to healing. And we want to thank you for being transparent about being physically violated from a young age, from I think 8 to 15.
Mm-hmm.
And the grief you went through from your brother and how your parents' divorce affected you, because there are a lot of folks that are going through one of those things from childhood into adulthood that have affected them. So we want to thank you for being a guest on Unfiltered Unspoken Podcast, where we're going to continue to share life experience with others in hopes that someone will connect so that they can start the journey to healing.
Thank you.
Sure.